Welcome. We're here today to honor Dina Temple-Raston for the Cyber Journalism Award. My name is Steph Daly. I run the global competition for all of the CSAW regions, so I have my hands in all the competitions that we'll be celebrating on Friday. And I'm also partnering up with the Center for Cybersecurity and Ramesh for this important award. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. And I'd like to introduce Professor Ramesh Karri. Professor Karri is the Global Faculty Director for CSAW and is also a co-director and co-founder of the NYU Center for Cybersecurity, which is located at NYU Tannen School of Engineering in Brooklyn. So Ramesh, I'll turn it over to you at this point to give a little introduction about the award itself.
Yes, welcome everyone. Just to quickly recap, this is our 18th annual cybersecurity games and conference, CSAW. It started off small. And about 4 years ago, we started the Cyber Journalism Award. Just about that time, cybersecurity was becoming important and getting into the mainstream, both in media and in terms of conversations that around cybersecurity. People were beginning to pay attention to some of the implications of cybersecurity and were being impacted by the attacks that cybersecurity engendered. For example, the Ukrainian power grid attack, and more recently, over the last year, the Clearview AI face recognition system and what it entails, and many other things, the misinformation and disinformation, Facebook like platforms engender, and so on. So, and at the same time, we've seen a lot of an increasing amount of reporting on this topic. The reporting was not only was both written, web, audio, video, and of course, even in books and blog posts and so on and so forth. So with that background, we as one of the largest centers for cybersecurity, where we've been here for a long time, we decided that we should start recognizing the leading articles and the writers and reporters behind those articles annually. So it's my with that background, I just want to introduce this year's Cyber Journalism Award winner. It's Miss Dina Temple-Raston. She is a senior correspondent at The Record, which is a cyber and intelligence news service, where she writes about China's digital prowess and is hosting and creating a series of podcasts for The Record and its parent company, Recorded Future. Previously, she spent 15 years at NPR covering terrorism, cybersecurity, and she was part of the network's award-winning investigations team. She's written about the mysterious death of the hacker Adrian Lamo, how the NSA hacked ISIS, and the Microsoft Exchange attack. Her writing has appeared in The New Yorker, The Atlantic, and The Washington Post, and she is also the author of 4 nonfiction books. In 2017, she created and hosted an Audible podcast called What Were You Thinking? About how the latest discoveries in neuroscience can begin to explain the adolescent decision-making process. She also created and hosted an NPR podcast called I Will Be Seeing You, about the technologies that watch us. She has degrees from Northwestern University and Columbia University School of Journalism. On that note, and this is when we have all the claps and Dina comes onto the stage and we actually give her the award. So
thank you.
Right there is the award. Steph, as always, planned it well and shipped the award to Dina. And it came.
I did say delivery. I said November 8th. So they delivered.
Yeah. So congratulations and thank you for that article on SolarWinds.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. So the structure of today's discussion will be a little bit of a Q&A. I'll start off with 2 or 3 questions, and there are a few others. Anybody that has a question can either put it in the chat or just raise your hand, and we can then recognize you and get your questions.
I'm just going to move the award so everyone can see it.
Yeah.
So that I don't knock it over when I gesture when I talk, because that would be bad. Okay.
Thank you. And so let me start off with one question. So the obvious question that comes when I read these articles is why this topic, right? Why did you decide to do a deep dive or explore this particular topic, SolarWinds? Why not something else? But let's not talk about why not something else, because that's an open-ended question. Why SolarWinds?
Well, at the time, I think it was really hard for anyone to get their arms around what the SolarWinds hack really was. We heard how bad it was, how it was a supply chain attack like no other. But if you asked anyone to really explain what it was, they couldn't say it in a sentence. In fact, they couldn't say it in a paragraph. And thanks to our story, and I think because we did as much reporting, you could sum it up and just say that SolarWinds had hackers using a routine update to inject software that they had infiltrated into tens of thousands of machines. Until we did our story, no one said it that way. No one could explain it that way. And that's what I think is really important about cyber journalism now, and why, in fact, I left NPR to go to The Record, was because we're hearing so much now about cybersecurity, ransomware, intrusions, but no one is really explaining it in a way that the average person can understand. And it used to be that these were all sort of adversaries who were going into the DIB, the defense industrial base, and stealing things. And we heard about intellectual property being taken. But now we're kind of down to the level of the sidewalks and in some cases the cornfields, I mean, we're having libraries in the Midwest suddenly be victims of ransomware. We're having, as everyone knows, meat processors being victims of ransomware. And so it seemed like it was time to sort of bring this down to a level where the average person could understand what was going on. And what we did at NPR, I was working with a producer and an editor, Barry Hardiman and Monica Estiva. And we were basically trying to make it so someone's mother could understand what actually happened. And we got lucky in some cases because we were talking to people who understood that we wanted it at that level. We didn't want it to be so complex. We wanted it to be precise, but we also wanted it to be understandable. And that was with the heavy lift. In addition to making it not just a written piece, it's a very long written piece, but in addition to that, we had to do that through audio. So it was sort of a backflip, and then we had to stick the landing.
So you mentioned the tens of thousands of machines. Do you know the scope? Is it mostly restricted to DIBs, or is it any company, any commercial company?
Well, so this was another thing that was very confusing when SolarWinds was first sort of publicized. We didn't know how many. We said potentially tens of thousands. Of course, we knew the embarrassing ones that had actually been compromised. Things like CSAW had actually been compromised, the DHS arm that's supposed to keep everybody safe. We knew that the Treasury had been compromised in some way. But it was sort of onesies and twosies. But we heard the potential was tens of thousands, and that's the number that came out in the beginning. Well, in order to actually have this hack work, a number of different environments had to be there. First of all, you had to download the bad software. So that was the first thing you had to do. Then the second thing you had to do was deploy it. Mm-hmm. And that isn't as automatic as you think, right? Because a lot of these downloads, and it's again, something that I didn't fully understand until we reported this out. A lot of these downloads, can mess with your internal systems. So what you have to do is you have to sort of test them before you actually deploy them to make sure that you're not sort of introducing something into your system that's going to, say, for example, make payroll go down or something like that. So you had to download it, you had to deploy it, and then the server that this was on had to be connected to the internet, because the only way that they could get in and exfiltrate stuff is if there was an internet connection. So I think now they've sort of more or less come to the conclusion that there were about 100 companies, some did, some not, that were infiltrated, and dozens, maybe about a dozen, a little more than a dozen government agencies were. And the way they've come to that conclusion is basically who downloaded it, this particular version, who deployed it, this particular version, and who has a computer facing the internet that would allow them to exfiltrate something. And that ended up, that environment, those three conditions ended up being somewhat limiting in the sense that it only allowed it to get so far.
So we already have a couple of questions. One is, like other cyber attacks, SolarWinds has been attributed to groups in Russia. Have you looked at the why behind that? Why are so many hackers locating themselves in countries like Russia? And what are your thoughts on solutions to that part of the problem? Or have you?
Well, it's interesting. We're trying to find out now whether or not actually pressing Vladimir Putin to sort of crack down on these groups will actually have some sort of effect. Ann Neuberger, who's the head of the sort of cyber operation at the NSC, was talking about how there seemed to be some cause and effect when they asked Vladimir Putin to step in. So in this case, they believe that the people who did this particular hack were the SVR. And so this was sort of Russian intelligence. And the problem is, and the reason why we're seeing so many of these hacks come from Russia, is that there's this sort of quasi relationship between hackers in Russia and the Russian government. And someone was telling me the other day that there's sort of a family in the air quotes kind of way. There's somewhere between 100 and 200 hackers who are really active in Russia, and they all know each other, and they, have particular ways of doing things so people recognize their work, et cetera, et cetera. And there's sort of a devil's pact that's been made with the Russian government, which is don't hack us and we'll look the other way. Or we catch you with a hack and we say, hey, we have a job for you. So it allows the government to have a certain an arm's length relationship and also deniability. And that's why we're seeing so much of this. And what's really interesting is that the Chinese have started to steal plays out of this particular playbook, where there's sort of this quasi relationship between people who might be hacking and the Chinese government. There's also a whole sort of hacking unit that's part of the PLA, which has no quasi relationship. It's very clear. A matter of fact, I think either the FBI or the Department of Justice has actually sort of gone through their system and snapped photographs of PLA military hacking. So that isn't a big secret either. I mean, what people are talking about now more than ever anything is that there needs to be some sort of agreement between allies, adversaries, frenemies to sort of say, okay, these are the off limit. This is a set of cyber norms where we just don't hack this kind of thing. And that hasn't happened yet, but people have been pushing for it for a while. And I would say that this is our best chance to get there because people are watching this in a way they hadn't been before. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah. So just to build on that, so we talked about how many got hacked, whatever, 100,000 machines, and it looked like a perfect storm. Do you know what the consequences are? You limited it to a few hundred machines. What are the long-term consequences of SolarWinds hack? For example, has there been any follow-on things like leaked information, like what happened when the leaks happened? Attacks, anything that could be directly attributed to?
We haven't seen it yet. Yeah. We haven't seen it yet. So, and also this is a different kind of operation, right? Because this is not the kind of thing necessarily where you're gathering information to leak it. It could be that you're gathering intelligence. This was an intelligence gathering operation. So we don't hear about it. I mean, one of the ways that they tell sometimes that a hack is an intelligence gathering operation rather than sort of a criminal operation is that many of the things that they get never show up on the dark web. If they don't show up on the dark web, then how are they monetized? Well, it must be an intelligence gathering operation.
So one other question that showed this, it's interesting, or this is the paraphrasing, that the attackers did everything right for this to succeed. They had defensive software that kept everything up to date. Then within these scenarios where the attackers are doing everything right, how can anyone keep up themselves safe in these scenarios or environments where even when you do the right thing, it doesn't seem to be enough to keep you safe?
Yeah, I'm not sure that SolarWinds necessarily is an example of that. I think that there was even their president was pretty clear. The president of the company was saying, look, he wasn't there when the hack originally happened. He was new. Ramakrishna is his name. He even admitted, and at various times sort of was more expansive about it, that security at SolarWinds was not what it should have been. And that allowed an opportunity. And if you also think about it, I mean, they denied this, but SolarWinds had advertising pages up that showed every one of its really big name clients, right? Which was sort of like saying, hey, if you're wondering who you should hack and you want to get to this kind of company, well, we're their management software company, so hack us. So in some ways, it was sort of flashing red, and people weren't really realizing it. And they said the same thing about the 9/11 attacks, right? It was a failure of imagination. Mm-hmm. Well, in the case of SolarWinds, there was a certain failure of imagination to think that if you went downstream to a company like SolarWinds that was servicing all these government agencies, that you were leaving yourself open to something. And that's eventually what happened. That's not to take away, however, and if you read the story or listen to the story, you'll see these people were really good. They were really careful. And typically your average hacker will leave some sort of, thumbprint, so to speak, or some sort of little calling card that lets you know that it's them. And in this case, when Adam Meyer from CrowdStrike started taking all of this apart and reverse engineering it, he was stunned by how they had scrubbed every single thing. That there was just there was this little blob of code that he found, and he was sure that this was going to be, so if you unravel it and you'll see all this, Cyrillic characters or something, and he opens up the blob and there was nothing. So he said that also what pointed to this being a nation state was just how patient these people were, right? So they would get in and ping something and then wait 2 weeks before checking back to see if the ping had worked. Things like that, which were really, these are not your average cyber attackers. And these are obviously people who are after something that's much bigger than, somebody's credit card number that you can put on the dark web.
Mm-hmm. So it's gone beyond the just stealing credit card numbers.
For certain.
So I don't know if you want to pick up on this thread. Is there any journalism that's looking into cyber attacks that originated from the US?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I know a journalist who wrote a really long piece on that, and that would be me. So I guess a couple of years ago, I can't remember exactly when I did it, but it would be a very easy piece to find. There was a piece that I did for NPR called Hacking ISIS. And it's all about how the NSA hacked into ISIS's media operations and the techniques that they used, not all of them in entirety, but they did declassify part of an operation called Operation Glowing Symphony for us. And we talked to actual operators and people who explained what they saw. And it's actually a great yarn. So, and it made a really good radio piece, because the guy whose idea Operation Glowing Symphony is the one who told us the story. And he talked about how they actually decided to do what they did. And they did things like, subtle things that, for example, someone who was supposed to be uploading one of those very famous ISIS movies, right? Those sort of almost snuff films that they used to put out. So someone was supposed to edit one and then put it up on the, so it could be seen up on YouTube or wherever their server was. And so what the NSA folks did is they just didn't put it up, right? They blocked it. The guy was supposed to put it up and they block it before it goes up. And then of course the guy comes in who had worked on it, said, "Hey, I told you to put it up. Why didn't you put it up?" "I did." "No, you didn't. You're so lazy." And then it sort of caused all this consternation within ISIS. And they could see this going back and forth, right? Or they would do the pinwheel of death, right? So you know how crazy it makes you when, you're trying to do something, then all you get is that sort of slow pinwheel. So they injected one. So they slowed down their internet basically to drive them nuts. And so there were, it's a pretty good story about the way, I think up until that story, there was a lot of mystery around the way the NSA responded to all these attacks. And there was certainly a general feeling, maybe not among experts, but a general feeling in the United States that Russia and maybe North Korea and Iran and maybe China all had these great hackers who were working for the government, and the US was sitting on its hands. And so I helped convince the NSA that the only way you could really have deterrence is if people knew what you were doing, right? Remember, NSA used to stand for No Such Agency. So they were actually really helpful and opened their doors to a lot of our questions and made a lot of their people available so that we would understand what there was a task force called Task Force Ares, what Task Force Ares did to try and bring down the media operation of ISIS. So yes, the answer to sorry, that was an incredibly long answer to the question, but yes, some journalists do things on what the US does in terms of hacking people, but to be frank, they are not very open about it. And it's really hard to get those stories. It's not because we don't want to do them. It's because in order to do them, you have to get an organization like Cybercom or NSA to decide it's in their interest to tell you the story. Incidentally, the Chinese came out this week and said that one of their regional airlines, they didn't say which one had been hacked by an adversary. And they didn't say which one, and they didn't say how, but apparently they got passenger information.
So how did this SolarWinds come to light?
The story or the
hack? So the story, so how did it get caught? And then, of course, you did the story.
Oh, of course. I'm sorry. Now I remember. So Kevin Mandia, who runs Mandiant, he's a former intelligence guy, former investigator, I think, in the Air Force or one of the military, one of the arms of the military. And so it turns out they hacked him. So they were using SolarWinds on one of their servers, and there was a phone call that was made, and it looked like one of their employees was asking to register a second phone. And they had someone who was in their sort of compliance or security department call the person to make sure that they actually were trying to register a second phone. And when they called him, he said, "What are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking about." So that sent off alarm bells right away, because for Kevin Mandia, this is exactly if someone tries to register a phone, then they get dual authentication, then they're in your network. So, and he had spent a lot of his time studying Russian intelligence. So he just had this tingly feeling that this is what it was. So he immediately called the NSA. They started tearing apart their servers to try and figure out where this was, and they finally isolated a server that had SolarWinds on it, SolarWinds management software on it. And this was another thing that nobody really explained what SolarWinds was for the longest time during that hack, right? So what is management software? Well, it's basically the way you should think about SolarWinds is it allows the administrator in your company to be able to sort of see on one screen kind of the health of the whole network. So if, that printer on the third floor that keeps breaking down, he can see, the router is down on floor 7. He or she can see on their screen that there's this problem. And if you think about it, what a totally genius thing to hack, because it, by its very nature, is touching everything in the network to make sure it's healthy. So if you hack something like SolarWinds, you can touch the entire network in the same way. And that was, again, part of and I don't mean to sort of extol the virtues of a bunch of hackers, but that was part of the genius of this, was that they thought through what should we get into that will allow us to have the most sort of spread out, the ability to really spread out and put ourselves in different places where people can't see us. And management software is a great example.
Thank you. So I think we have lots of, I hope we explored the different aspects of the SolarWinds, from what tipped it off and what tipped you off, and implications and impact and so on. What's next? What are you working on now? And since you left NPR, joined Record, you already explained what Record is all about, but what's your...
Yeah, so the next big project is going to be the kind of podcast that you would hear pieces like the SolarWinds piece on. So we're putting together a podcast that would be, to begin with, once a week, that will take a look at hacks or policy or companies or intelligence that are of the week, and write about them in a narrative way, get experts in to talk about them, so that not just experts like CISOs or chief information officers will understand it, but so that the average person can start to understand how cyber is affecting them, the Internet of Things, 5G. What does that mean for the FBI? What does that mean for surveillance? These are the sorts of things that people are interested in. And that aren't, I think there's a really nice niche for us to be essentially the Bloomberg of cyber and do that for us.
I like that, Bloomberg of cyber.
Well, I was one of the original Bloombergers, so I see a lot of comparisons. You know, back in the old days, there were business sections of newspapers were thin, right? So one of the things that Bloomberg provided was with its news service, it allowed you to beef up your business section. Remember when newspapers were paper? And if you look at a roster of different regional newspapers today, they don't talk about cyber. So you hear that the library was hacked, but you don't know what that really means. So this gives us an enormous audience to sort of educate. And if we do it right, if we write in a way that's compelling, that is for experts, but also explains it to your mother or my mother, then I think it's a huge service. And that's what we're doing next. So you should watch this space. And pretty soon there's going to be a podcast that I hope everyone finds really engaging about this sort of new frontier.
We will be on lookout for that. Did you already have one ready, or when is it being?
It's a secret. So but really soon, I would say there are things happening in February that I would look to February to have the first one drop. And in order to start a podcast, you have to have 5 episodes kind of in the can in case something goes wrong. So we know what we're doing, and I'm in the process of doing it. Excellent.
This is very good. Steph, I just promised to keep it to half an hour. So we are about 5:30, 5:32. And but thank you again. And thanks for sharing with us the memento, the award that you got just in time. We'll invite you to NYU again on me. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much for the award. I didn't have the moment to say that it's an incredible honor, and the people who've gotten this award in the past are just such amazing people. So it just feels really lovely that you've chosen me for this year. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person to meet everyone and to have drinks with them. So
before we hang up, thank you. But I missed one question, so I was reading it at the very end. This is Lois from our Cybersecurity Center. Based on your research, what are the lessons lessons learned from this attack that can lead to better defensive strategies? Did any specific systemic vulnerabilities come to light? My apologies if this is in the article. So if you wanted to.
It is a little bit in the article, but I think that you can say that the executive order that came out not too long after SolarWinds started to address a lot of these things that basically our cyber hygiene, which has sort of become a buzzword that nobody really listens to, dual authentication, things like that. Those sorts of things, or imagine we would still, SolarWinds had been going on for almost a year. If Kevin Mandia didn't have the security person who made one phone call to make sure somebody was actually registering a second phone, we may still not know that SolarWinds had happened. So I think those are the sorts of things that there's sort of a knowledge that we all need to have, or an awareness that we all need to have, which again gets back to why I'm doing what I'm doing. I think there isn't enough awareness of what's going on, and it's all of our jobs to explain it.
On that note.
Yeah, we look forward to your future work. We have February in mind. Yeah, thank you so much, Dina. We really appreciate your time in joining us. It's a really special part of our cybersecurity games and conference. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, and let the games begin, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Good luck to everyone.
That's right. Okay. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you for having me.
Good night.
Good night.